Good evening. Hi, my name is Samantha Marshall. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement here at the University of Toledo Alumni Office. I would like to begin this evening by thanking Patron Saints for joining us and participating in tonight's program. I'd also like to thank all of you at home for joining us. As we continue to reach out to our alumni and friends around the world during this COVID pandemic, we've added virtual programming in hopes of providing opportunities for alumni to engage and connect with each other during these challenging times. I do want to let all of you know that all the participants are currently muted. However, you can use the Q&A function. Hey, Blue Crew, we see you. Thank you so much for joining us, but please feel free to use the Q&A if you have any questions throughout the program. And with that, I would like to introduce to you my coworker, Paul Smith.
Thank you, Sam. I would now like to introduce the coworkers of Patron Saints Brewery, Aaron Grizaniuk and Eric Coll. Patron Saints is a West Toledo nano brewery crafting a wide variety of beer styles. The tap room opened 2 years and 3 months to today, July 20th, 2018. They sell pints, tasters, growlers, in their tap room right off Bancroft Street, which is dog friendly and is also right on the UToledo bike trail. Patron Saints was founded after countless nights of home brewing and wishing there was a brewery closer to their neighborhood. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Grizaniuk and Eric Coll. Gentlemen, good afternoon or good evening and welcome.
Yeah, thanks guys. This is another fun event. I know we've done a few of these in the past. Sadly, good news is we have technology, so we're still able to meet and hang out with everybody. Unlike the last one we had in person, that was a lot of fun too.
Yes, absolutely. So there's so much we'd like to talk to you about tonight this evening, but honestly, I think we should probably taste one of your beers first. So what's the first beer that you would like for us to try tonight?
So the first one, usually if you have a flight or a pairing of beer, you want to start with the lightest, the least bitter beer. So on today's agenda, the least would be St. Pius. That'll be our red ale. It's a nice, smooth drinker. It's not very bitter. You get a lot of maltiness with the red and a little bit of roasted malt that's in it. Makes it a little bit of a malty beer. And it's a good beer for everybody. So it kind of goes across the spectrum from people who like hoppy beers and not. So St. Pius.
So I know we have some people tonight that's probably one of their first beer tastings they've ever done or really been to, especially with professionals such as yourself. I know, there it says on the can, there's the alcohol content 4.9 in this case. What's the IBU mean, and what is the number? How does that work? Can you explain that? I know this one I think is 18 IBUs.
Yeah, so IBU stands for International Bittering Units, and it's a scale from 0 to about 150. And the higher the number, the more bitter a beer will be. So it's equally as important, especially if you like or don't like bitter beers. That's an easy way to help you choose a beer if you're looking at a wide variety of them. Sometimes a sweeter beer, even though it has a higher IBUs, will not be as bitter just because there's a lot of sweetness to it. It kind of helps balance it out. But if you're kind of looking at two beers within the same style, like a pale ale or an India pale ale, an IPA, the higher the IBUs, the more bitter it will be.
Not every manufacturer puts that on their cans, but you see it more and more. So
I guess before we start our next beer, we kind of touched on how you guys got started very, very briefly in the introduction there. Would you mind sort of, taking us back to a couple of years ago and sort of why you decided to open up Patron Saints and sort of how that all started?
Yeah, well, we were Aaron and I got into home brewing through Aaron. I tried it I guess I can't remember the year exactly. It must have been about 5-6 years ago. I got a beer kit for Christmas. You know, thought I followed the instructions, made the beer. 3-4 weeks later, it was just god awful. And I thought, this is for the birds. I'll just buy a beer like everybody else. And through my mom and some other, she knew Aaron's mother-in-law, and they worked together. And I met Aaron basically through that, and he was nice enough to, say, hey, I'll get you, I'll come show you how I do it. And so he came over to my apartment at the time. We brewed a batch of beer, and it was spot on to exactly what I thought we'd be making, and got me hooked. And Aaron had been brewing, I know, several years before me, so he got me kind of involved. We kind of brewed on and off together here and there, did our own thing, collaborated, did some things in the driveway together. And we were sitting around one night, wishing there was a beer on this side of town. And that's when we decided, people like what we're making, maybe we should try to hang our own shingle and take the plunge, and as a side job to start, and it turned into somewhat of a full-time gig now, obviously, for both of us.
Yeah, I think I had been homebrewing for, 10, 11 years, and, everybody likes free beer. But my background, so I graduated from the University of Toledo back in 2005. After that, I got into banking, so a lot of retail banking. And then I also worked for the Diocese of Toledo, overseeing 64 schools, marketing and enrollment. So between kind of, the operations and then the banking side, and then Eric's a Purdue grad and has been in chemical sales for how long?
I was in chemical sales for 15 years. So we have the cleanliness of the area locked down. So
between the sales, the operations, and the marketing, and at the time there was only Balmy Bay and Black Cloister downtown, we decided to move forward. And since then, there's a ton of other great breweries in the area, so it's kind of fun to ride along the wave with them.
What would you say? I'm sure there's lots of people that were sitting where you were a couple years ago, where they're making great beer and they're considering doing what you guys have done. What would you say your biggest challenge was in making take this dream to a reality?
Challenge. Well, I'd say not knowing. Like, we've never opened a business. We've always worked for somebody else, and we knew what it would take, but the time and effort, I think, is substantially more. As you read and research how to start it, they say plan on taking twice as long to open and cost twice as much money. And even when building a business plan and you count 30-40% thinking there's no way that's right, yeah, it really is. So I think that the amount of time that it took, because there was about 13 months that we had rent without being open.
Yeah, we were ready to go, and the city didn't think we quite were. So that was a challenge, but we got through that, and we officially opened in July of 2018, like you had mentioned earlier. But I think we were ready a little bit before that. But.
Yeah.
Well, we're very glad that you opened, and you're so. Would you guys mind leading us into the second beer of the evening?
Yeah, the second beer we've got here is St. Arnold. It's our Oktoberfest, and I guess we can taste it. You'll get a malty sweetness, kind of a spicy dry aftertaste. We release our Arnold, or the Oktoberfest, I should say, more in line with, I guess, maybe the season, so to speak. The Oktoberfest started in Germany, and actually was a honeymoon celebration way back. But it would have been September 19th this year had it taken place. And that's when we decided to release ours. We saw some competitors and friends release theirs in July. And I just don't, we just never thought that would be the right time to release a beer that tastes maybe a little better in the winter, or I guess fall season. And so we release ours now, more so to speak. And I think it works well because it just got to be a little cooler and misty out. And as today, you know, kind of a cold, damp day, and it's a good beer to kind of warm yourself, so to speak.
I have to tell you, I was extremely nervous for this portion of the evening because I might have overserved myself Oktoberfest over the weekend. So I was really worried whether I'd make it through this particular tasting, but it's delicious. So thank you.
It's easy to do. It's a great beer right now. And it kind of kicks off the fall for us.
Yeah, the weather's perfect. It's nice and cold. You know, soon enough we'll have UT football, and you know, they pair perfectly together. So that's why we like our Oktoberfest in October.
Love it. Would you guys mind sharing your thoughts as to why you think home brewing has become suddenly so popular?
The craft beer industry has been growing as a whole, and I think everybody is becoming a little bit more do-it-yourself, and the kits are definitely more readily available, so it's easier to get a lot of the ingredients versus, you know, 15, 20 years ago, you had to do it on your own. And there's a lot of homebrew groups that kind of people get together, similar to what Eric and I did, but there's groups of people who would just get together and brew together. So you kind of learn from each other. There's a camaraderie of hanging out, and then you stay at home. So it's kind of a win-win-win.
And I think, not to plug anybody, but Ticktemeyer's here in town has been really helpful, I think, to the industry itself, here in Toledo at least. They're a great spot to go and get your ingredients if you're interested in doing your own home brew. There's also some other areas in Ann Arbor and some places, but they've helped us a lot, at least Ticktemeyer's here locally. It's good guys, and that's kind of where we started.
Eric, I heard that there was a local home brewers club that might have helped you and other home brewers perfect your craft. Have other breweries that spawned in the Toledo area benefited from this type of group as well?
Yeah, actually, so neither Eric or I were part of a formal group. We just kind of hung out with friends. Another great friends of ours, Ernest Brewworks. He was a Glass City Mashers. That's another great homebrew club. We're good friends. Talk to all those guys. We just never committed to going there to the groups. But yeah, Glass City Mashers. It helped Ernest Brewworks. They're both part of their group.
What advice would you guys have for home brewers or alums or just friends looking to start home brewing?
I would say just do it. Just
yeah, you just kind of. I would say start with the kits, which they're pre-packaged. Like for example, Ticktemeyer's has. They'll really walk you through it, but they have all the ingredients in basically a one box shop type thing to start your own. Aaron and I are happy to help anybody too. I mean, we always committed to helping anyone that's interested come by and see how we could walk you through how to get started, what you need. It's not much. I mean, I did half the ingredient barrels on my apartment on my stove top, which was super small, 2.5 gallon batches. And Aaron said, "Hey, you got to do 5 gallons at least and get bigger." So you start small and you can always grow.
All right. If you guys had to go back and do it all over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Well, with licensing and things, yeah, we would have done things a little differently, but I think overall concept, I don't think so. I mean,
yeah, I think the concept, the size that we started perfectly small. We were able to, when we had little problems, tweaking recipes as you get them bigger. They didn't cost us too much to, if it was a little too bitter, a little less hoppy than we wanted. Yeah, I don't think other than going through the licensing, there's nothing I would change.
Yeah, I mean, we started small and are trying to stay small. We're trying to grow, obviously, but stay within ourselves as well, too. So I think we're doing a good job, and so.
Yeah, we think you're doing a great job. Would you guys mind sharing? There's a question that came in the Q&A, and I think the question is, what makes the color of this particular beer?
So there's different crystal malts. So you have a base grain that is very neutral. It'll get you almost clear like a lager. And then they roast the grain to different caramel levels. And so the higher the number, the more red tint that it can add to the beer, as well as it adds the sweetness. So that's why this one uses the crystal malts that add the reddish color and then help make it a little sweeter, similar to St. Pius. They also use different grains, but that's how both the Oktoberfest and Pius have the red. So it's the different crystal malts that are added to it.
All right, well, I think we're going to head into the next tasting here, and I know a lot of our participants are anxious to hear a little bit more about the different names of the beers and how you guys came up with that. So we'll head into the next beer if you guys don't mind.
Yeah. So the next beer is St. Francis. This one is a farmhouse ale, and if you haven't heard of a farmhouse, it's a Belgian saison. It's a little bit bigger in alcohol, so 8.2%. But with the lower IBUs, it still stays a little sweet. The big difference maker with a farmhouse or Belgian is it has a little bit of a funky tart finish to it. So that's what kind of brings on almost like a slight bubble gum or tartness in the finish of a farmhouse or a Belgian that make them really unique.
So I guess I should probably have had some questions as well as for my own self as a proud product of one of those diocesan Catholic schools that you referred to there at the beginning. I have to say I really enjoy the creativity of the various different saint names. It's tends to be unique and entertaining at the same time. How do you go about naming your beer and kind of picking the saint? Is it based on a church? Is it based on a school? Is it based on the historical significance of a particular saint? How do you guys go about selecting the saint or the name for each one of your beers?
Well, I think we try to be local as possible, and I wouldn't say necessarily schools or even I don't know. I wouldn't say churches, but like we try to. Well, I mean, I guess so, but
we try to tie them in a little bit to what the saint would be. Also,
yeah, and the for example, the beer we just tasted, St. Francis, it's a farmhouse beer, and he happens to be the patron saint of animals. So there's some connection, or at least we try to make the connection to the beer and the saint. It doesn't always work, but when it does, we try to make that connection, and then of course, then when it doesn't make the connection, then we look to the local area and the parishes around town, and maybe try to highlight their name and the people we know maybe from those parishes. I guess it's the best way to say it.
Yeah, because even St. Arnold, he's one of the patron saints of brewers. So it's a good, strong German beer, and St. Arnold, German name, and so that seemed to be fitting. When we originally developed the concept for patron saints, we did want to keep it kind of simple, as opposed to trying to go too crazy. We're right here in the middle of Holy Toledo. I was working for the Diocese of Toledo at the time, and so we just said, why don't we just name our beers after saints? And it's kind of worked out really well for us. It keeps it simple. They tie into names. So yeah, and then we do have our regulars through the year. So we have our staples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Sure you can figure out where those come from. And then we rotate the other beers.
Yeah, I would say Francis obviously is, and Ursula are the other two staples. And Pius is actually, I would say we almost have 7 that are truly year round. And then we rotate the other seasonals and other favorites in there.
Yeah, and there's another, we have a nitro stout. It's a chocolate milk stout. It's called St. Bridget, and Bridget is also the patron saint of dairy farmers. So there is, again, there is some correlation back to the saint itself, any chance we can. I did see a question. Yes, we do sell the masks. I saw that in the question and answer. So yes, we do sell them.
We haven't really had an official beer off yet between the Johnnies and the Frannies, but
it sounds like a fun night.
Sounds like it could be a fun day.
Especially after COVID, we could just pair up the schools. That'd be hilarious. That'd be great.
So, I mentioned before, we have some people here, it's their first beer tasting, and I know, some people understand the brewing process inside and out, and for others, it's all a foreign language to them. So, if you wouldn't mind explaining to us, kind of, starting back at square one, what does a brewing process look like, and how does it really differ from beer to beer? Is there anything that is different from beer to beer from it, or is it pretty much the same process, just with different ingredients and slightly different aspects?
He brews most of our beers. He got me into it, but I follow his lead on a lot of this. I just sell a lot of the kegs. So.
So the brewing process is very similar for every beer. Generally, it's steeping grain for half an hour to an hour, and then the boil is where you boil the beer, and then you add the hops during that. And then at the end, you ferment it and you add the yeast. So that is a super high level, but between the different grains that you add, that will control the color and the alcohol content. And then when you add the hops during the boil, that controls the bitterness and the flavor and the aromas. And then the yeast, for instance, like St. Francis, a lot of that flavor in the beer comes from the yeast itself. But the overall process is pretty similar outside of a lager, where it would take, a couple months versus an ale. Usually it's about a 2-week turnaround from the time that we brew to the time we can drink it. So I have a question from Dave. How long before a growler, before it goes flat? It's kind of like a 2-liter. Once you open it and start drinking it, that will cause it to go flat. The head space, the open area, the carbonation comes out of the beer and fills the area above it. So normally, once you open a growler, within about 2 to 3 days is best. Generally, they don't last more than an hour around me, but you may be different.
Yeah, and I also see some reasons why we named. I think we kind of covered a little bit of the Saints, but our first beer that we named, I just kind of go back, with Saint Nick, our Christmas ale. We signed our LLC together. I remember the night. It was in October. It was about a year. It was 3 years ago.
October 16th.
Yeah, it was. It was actually just almost 3 years exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we woke up the next morning and said, we just signed an LLC together? I think we did. And we were trying to figure out a Christmas ale name, and we said Saint Nick isn't taken. Like, I don't think anyone has it. So that's what we named our Christmas ale. We immediately thought, well, in March we could name our stout St. Patrick. And so that to answer some of those questions, that we just decided that naming the beers after saints was kind of easy. We didn't have to think of a crazy name and trying to look at some of these other questions. And then we actually named beers before we actually had a name for ourselves. And then we decided, well, what are we going to name ourselves, or what our brews going to be? And we said, well, those were patron saints that we named, so why don't we just call ourselves Patron Saints Brewery?
Yeah, like Eric said, we try to stick to the seasons. So Christmas ale, we will release it the day after Thanksgiving. So it'll be Black Friday. We release our Christmas ale, cinnamon and sugar rim, and the whole 9 yards. But we do wait for the next season. We enjoy Thanksgiving, we enjoy Halloween and Christmas. So we make the seasons last.
So you've mentioned before that, there's people with Oktoberfests over the summer and Christmas sales that are, before Thanksgiving. What tends to drive that? Is it just people trying to be first on the shelves, or what's typically the rationale behind, drinking Oktoberfest in August?
I think that you hit it on the head, as in trying to be first on the shelves for the distributor market. We're small still. And we can distribute our, independently. So it's, like I said, it's Aaron brews it and I move it. So, but there's something to be said to have your beer in the right spot on the shelf at the right time. And the guys are, these days are the first one there is probably going to sell the first. So we understand it. We're at a point where we decided, 3 years ago, I guess, shouldn't say long ago, but that we would try to stick with the seasons. I mean, it's not Christmas yet, and you're seeing Christmas sales release. So I don't know. It's one of those things. Just the two of us decided we try to stick closer. Now that'll maybe change someday, as we grow. But if we can, we'll keep it the way it is for us.
And it's a little unique because, we do have the 4 seasons. A lot of these other breweries are across the United States. So, Florida, there's not really a winter. Southern California, Texas, it's always hot. But we're here. We do it for our community and the people around us. And, we like our seasons. So since we're small enough, we'll kind of cater to that and keep our beers with the seasons.
Right, guys, do you want to lead us into the next tasting?
Yeah. Well, we got, I think St. Matthew is up. And St. Matthew's our year-round stout. It's one of our staples. You'll want to go ahead and take a taste. It's a dry stout. It's got some, it's a very roasty, coffee taste from the malts we use. I think it's one that, like I said, it caters to the year-round crowd. It's one of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first beer that we brewed as officially Patron Saints in our spot that we're currently located. And it's when we tasted it the first time, we thought, well, this is a winner. We got to stick to this recipe.
That's great. Erica, do you mind sharing a little bit of information, as it's an ingredient I know that I'm not super familiar with, and maybe some of our participants are not very familiar with? Would you be willing just to kind of tell us a little bit about what it is and how do you source it?
The hops?
Yes.
Yeah.
Catch.
So yeah, the hops, they come from all over. They're I guess if you equate it to wine, they're kind of like grapes. So they're grown all over the world. They are all grown for a specific purpose. So a hop itself looks like about a pine cone. They're kind of small. They grow on a vine vertically. So if you see them, they can grow up to like 20 feet straight up. And then when they're harvested,
they're a weed.
Yes.
I mean, actually.
Yeah, they can actually grow up to.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so they grow 20 feet tall, and in their prime, they can almost grow about it's a foot a day. But the hops themselves come from different regions, and they're grown with certain characteristics in them, and so that's also kind of how you can brew the same the beer, but if you use a different hop, it'll alter the flavor a little bit. And that's kind of like where you get into cooking. You kind of find what works, what doesn't work, what pairs well with each other. And so, yeah, so hops, they come from all over the world and they all have different flavors. We trust the manufacturer before we kind of go by what their description is and then use them in a beer.
There's different kinds too. There's the cone hop, which would be right off the vine, which we've used. They tend to kind of clog up the machinery. We've gone to the compressed, more like, I would say they look like rabbit food or, pellets, is what we've kind of switched to. I see some more questions coming in to the feed. Stores that we sell, we're in several restaurants and bars here in the area. We've also moved into the Port Clinton area.
So yeah, a lot of bars. Back to the hops. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
So there's a question: dry hopping. So there's 2 times you can add hops to the boil process, the brewing process. One of them is during the boil. So the boil will break down the hop and helps release the oils out of it, which then causes it to have the bitterness. Dry hopping is after the beer is done fermenting. You add another round of hops to it, and the dry hop it adds all the aroma. So your India Pale Ales, some Pale Ales, and a couple other styles, but mostly IPAs, will have another second round of hops added, which is why they smell so much hoppier than a normal beer that is not quote unquote dry hop. So they still go in wet. So there's nothing dry about it, but yeah, so dry hop is after the beer's been fermented. You add another round of hops.
I see a dry versus question mark from our buddy Russ and Catherine. That is, so like Aaron just explained, they really aren't dry to begin with, but wet hopped is another term. And that's basically right off the vine before the cone itself can be aired out and dry. And those beers tend to be a little grassier tasting. We haven't actually released a wet hop yet. I know some other guys in the area have, but that's not something we've done. But that's, I guess, the difference between dry and wet. And the reasons maybe some beers taste good from year to year is, it's amazing how the large breweries, Anheuser, Miller, and those guys they're brewing all over the world, right? And their beers taste exact every time, and it's really, truly amazing. We're still brewing our beers with paddles. I mean,
just by hand.
I mean, it's truly craft. So sometimes if we paddled for 5 minutes and 30 seconds versus 5 minutes and 40 seconds, it might make a difference. So,
and the other thing is, if you're talking about, a beer tastes good one year and the next it doesn't, sometimes it could be the way it was packaged, because there's 2 things that will kill a beer, and that is light and oxygen. I'm going to get that.
I think we're going to get a few paddles that we have.
That's fantastic.
I think I watched something on one of the Discovery or National Geographic or something about how things are made, and one of them was a brewery thing, and the Anheuser, I mean, the way they do that, and they just dial in numbers, and then they have all the hundreds of tasters that come in and make sure that taste exact every batch. So we think we're pretty close batch to batch. We let our consumers know, or they let us know whether we're close on a batch or not. So,
well, I think you guys answered my next question, because I was going to ask how what you guys are doing is different from more of the mainstream beers like Bud and Coors and Miller, but I think now I know it's the paddle.
Oh, it's definitely the paddle.
Definitely the paddle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about the paddle.
Yep.
If I learned one thing today, it's the paddle. We did get one question from Deb, which I think is a really great question. She's asking, some dark beers have a strong chocolate or coffee flavor. How are those flavors added?
There's two ways. A lot of them come from the grain. So the maltsters are the people that take the grain and they roast it to have certain profiles, whether it's lighter, darker, roasty or not. There's even a grain that tastes like chocolate. So I would probably say 90% of the time it comes from the grain that you add in the beginning. There are, like we do our St. Patrick, we use local chocolate made right here in Toledo over at Christie's Candy. So we do add chocolate to our St. Patrick chocolate coffee stout. So you can use the grain or actual chocolate. Chocolate is very sticky and it's a pain in the butt to clean up, but it's delicious.
So speaking of chocolate and coffee beers, I've seen peanut butter flavored beers and all sorts of different trends and experiments in the craft beer. Are there any interesting combinations that you guys have come across that you have really enjoyed, and maybe even some that you're not so interested in?
Well, beer wise, we've done a peanut butter brown ale. It was very good. We used, I think, cereal, Reese's peanut butter cereal cups cereal. It was excellent. Seltzer wise, that's a whole different. We'll get to that beer here, but that's the one that we really experiment with, and we have a series called Holy Water that we use some really gnarly combinations of flavors and ingredients. But beer wise, we stay pretty traditional, really. With our combinations, I would say we've had some coconut beers, we've had some maple the maple pecan stout was a big hit, which is coming back soon. It's a cold weather beer. We've had some really interesting shandies and some other fruited blonde ales, which have been a hit. So to answer your question, I would say we do have that in our arsenal, so to speak, but our seltzers are where we really kind of experiment, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of breweries going to sour beers. That's not necessarily, I don't know, it's one of those things. They're gaining popularity. But there's a lot of other breweries that do them really well. And once you start with them, it's a controlled infection. So once you start with sour beer, you kind of have to use your equipment similar just for most of that. So that is hard. But I'd say the sour.
I can see Paul twitching. Paul's not a fan of the sour beer.
Yeah, that's what we've heard. So
I've tried. I just can't do it. No Jolly Pumpkin for me.
yeah, Jolly Pumpkin. Here locally, there's Wildside Brewing right down in Grand Rapids, Ohio. So if you do like sour beers, go check them out.
They're excellent. If you like sour beers, that they're doing some special things.
And then Eric, you asked a question about water. So Toledo's water is relatively hard, and because it has a lot of minerals, it is actually good for brewing. I don't really have to adjust the pH levels based on what we do. The biggest problem with Toledo water is chlorine. So you need to make sure if you do home brew that you have a really good chlorine filter, like a charcoal filter, to get out a lot of the chlorine. But the minerals that are in Toledo's tap water makes it really good for most beer styles. You can go crazy and adjust it if you need, but as a base and to keep it simple, compared to a lot of cities in the United States, it's actually pretty good water to start brewing with.
And we do find out that in late June, all of July and August, when they're trying to control the cystine in the lakes, the bloom, the algae bloom, it does get a little different. So those are the months that we are happy to have our filter that we use.
All right. Well, I think you can take us to our next tasting here. I believe it's the St. John IPA.
Yeah, this is again one of our original beers. I would say it's probably our best selling beer. IPAs seem to sell well. Go ahead and take a taste of it. It's got it's overly I would say there's a incredible amount of Centennial hops that we use and a little bit of Loral at the end. Again, it's one of our better sellers. It's sweet, but it's still got that IPA West Coast bitterness to it. Again, it's like I said, it's probably our favorite beer, maybe I would say collectively, and it's always on tap, or at least we hope so, unless you guys buy us out of it. But it's also one of the more popular beers too around town that the bars tend to gravitate toward. Have a good taste.
So what would be your most popular beer? Would it be the St. John IPA, or are there others that tend to be more popular?
Kind of seasonal. I would say right now the Oktoberfest is really selling well. Some of these seltzers we put on sell well as well. But this, I mean, I would say over the 3 years we've been open, or I guess 2 years, I would say St. John's probably volume-wise our best seller.
Now, we do have a question in the Q&A section. Are the foams different, or is it just our imagination?
Russ is always imagining things, so we can start off with that. However, yeah, some of the beers, depending on how they're carbonated, some may be a little less head, the foam on top, and so it could be a little different as well as the color. So yeah, it's totally possible between beers, as well as how it holds up or how long it stays on top or not.
It might be how you pour it too. I mean,
So you've mentioned you've mentioned seltzers. So I know that's a trend that some people love to hate on. It's probably the best way to describe it. Some people refuse to put seltzers in their beer cooler, right? Where others have really embraced it. How did you guys sort of get to the point of embracing seltzer? What made you guys sort of try that? And tell us kind of how you worked through that process.
Yeah, the seltzers, I mean, obviously it's the really interesting thing is it falls underneath a brewer's license, where a cider falls underneath a winery license because it's fermented from fruit. But because a seltzer is just fermented sugar, it falls underneath us. It's something we can make. It's the nice couple things about it is it's gluten-free. It's very low calorie and low carbohydrate. So for those that have maybe a gluten allergy, or want to just drink a little lighter, the seltzers have taken off. It's a very light alcohol. During the summer, you can drink quite a few of them by the pool. So that's kind of, I think, why the seltzers have taken off. In our eyes, as we grow, we could fill our tap room with just people who drank beer. But the people that we're surrounded by, our community, maybe one person likes beer, the other one doesn't. Well, we needed an offering that also satisfied the other people's taste. And that's kind of where seltzers have fallen into to allow those people to kind of come hang out. We're getting very creative with the seltzer flavors themselves. So right now we have apple pie and pumpkin pie on tap. We've done a jalapeno pineapple, which was delicious and spicy. So it's really fun to play around with the different flavors and bring the craft beer to just a slightly different product.
I have to give credit to Aaron for developing those seltzers that we have. For Lent, he gave up beer. That's hard to do when you own a brewery. And he was thinking, well, shoot, I got to drink something. So so he's like, I'll just go to seltzers. And he's like, well, darn it, we got to have our own. And it took a lot of trial and error. Don't want to give away our trade secrets, but it's not as easy as it seems. And we finally figured it out. And sadly or weirdly, the quarantine of those 2 months kind of gave us the time where we could do that and figure out, okay, what makes a good seltzer? How do we get rid of the initial, I guess, soda off flavors? And, at one point I was like, Aaron, man, let's just stick with beer. And he was like, no, man, I got to do this. So he got it done. And when we reopened in May, we took off with these things, and they've seemed to sell really well. We've got a couple here in some, area bars and restaurants, and our tap room seems to be the best place to get them. We have something new, it seems like, every week or so in the seltzer area, I guess. So, and we have this holy water version that we like to call that's very high in alcohol, that starts your day off or night off nicely.
Is that the one you've been using for a base for a Bloody Mary?
Yeah, so we started, it wasn't just making the seltzer, but making something we could use a few different ways. So it does start off at a much higher alcohol, and then we dilute it down to 5.5% for our normal seltzers. But we had a lot of people coming in and asking, be like, "How are you going to be open Sunday?" We don't, for anybody who's not been to the tap room, we do not do food, but we have food trucks. And we mentioned it to a couple of them, and they said, yeah, that would be fun. So we started opening from 10 to 2, and we do beer mosas, seltzer mosas, which is just beer and seltzers with a little splash of orange juice in it. But the really fun thing was taking the seltzer base, not carbonated, it's a really high alcohol, and then blending it with tomato juice and other spices, and now we can make our own Bloody Marys. And yes, it's really different, but here's the thing. So we're a brewery. We can only sell what we manufacture here. We cannot manufacture alcohol, spirits, so we can't make vodka. We can't go out and buy it and add it. So we're like, oh, this could be fun. And it turned out really well. It's a little bit thinner than a normal traditional Bloody Mary, but when it was 95 degrees out, people loved it and still do.
So one of the questions we have here in the Q&A is, what is the time frame from your initial recipe creation to the final product? Do you usually do a couple iterations of a beer, or is it kind of like, that weird aunt at Thanksgiving that just tries a new recipe and hopes that it turns out okay and that everyone likes it?
Yeah, we just kind of shoot from the hip sometimes, and you've brewed enough, you kind of know exactly what your ingredients are going to do, so it's not completely surprise. So normally, we have an idea for a beer, and then from brew day to being able to drink it is usually about 2 weeks. We have a couple beers like a Kolsch that's on tap right now that once it's done fermenting, it sits in the cold room and crashes, or lagers, for about 4 weeks before we put it on tap. And there's a couple others. We do our Christmas ale. We actually age in bourbon and oak chips and a little more cinnamon and orange. So those take a few months. But the normal turnaround is about 2 weeks.
Never really screw up.
Yeah.
I mean, you always end up. It's just whether that beer is what you thought you were going to shoot for. So we've had some batches that haven't maybe lived up to what we thought. And maybe we just, if they're still decent, we have a new beer, So we don't waste a lot here.
So, and then seltzers are just a few days shorter. They're a little bit faster to make because it's just simple sugar. And then, where it takes 2 weeks for a beer, a seltzer maybe about 10 days. So it's a couple
Lush.
Lush.
Yeah, that probably is true.
Yeah. Highest alcohol content you can do. So the state of Ohio used to be 12% alcohol up until about 3 years ago. Right now, we could manufacture as high as we could. However, right around 15, 18% will be our limits based on the yeast that is out there. So we could go higher, but to make a good beer, we're probably somewhere in the 15 to 18%. We have actually brewed a 15% alcohol honey brown ale. So we have done a 15% beer that turned out really well. Oh, geez.
Hi, Dave.
Dave.
I would definitely concur that it's better in a glass, poured from a can, I would say. I think we both agree on that. And especially on the glass that you poured into, it makes a difference. And the shape of the glass, honestly, I can tell the difference for sure. It releases more aromas, and especially on an IPA, for example, it's kind of like wine in that you get the full concoction of what those hops are doing for the beer in a blossom tulip type glass than you would out of a can, I would say. Aaron might have a better explanation, but that's how I perceive it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think your macro beers like Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, just drink them in whatever they came in. Those points are consumption, but when you get into craft beer, it's 100% better poured out into the proper glassware, similar to a wine. As in, like, better in a glass, I would assume, I don't know if you're talking about bottles in a can. The one advantage a can has over a glass is it 100% hides light. And again, the two things that kill beer are light and oxygen. So a can will actually better preserve a beer than a glass bottle over time.
And it will stay colder too than glass will. So I think that's why you see a lot of craft beer move from glass even to cans if they didn't start in cans already.
Yeah, so Blue Crew, thanks to Paul and Sam, we've actually hosted some tailgating parties just outside of the stadium.
We're trying to get in there.
Working on it with enough requests, I'm sure. Maybe we could just have the Blue Crew on the can in the stadium. That would be fun. But yeah, so right now we're not inside the stadium, but thanks to the UT Alumni Association, we've been involved with Art on the Mall and as well as the tailgating outside of the stadium prior to a football game.
You guys can add that to your post-event survey comments, and we'll make sure we get those to the appropriate people in our office. But before we run out of time, do you guys want to lead us into the final tasting of the evening? I will admit mine's already gone, but that's okay.
Yeah, so I mean that's the kind of thing that people don't want to admit, but the seltzer. So this one's white peach mango. They're super clean, very light, and we've been able to add a lot of flavor to them. So they're perfect. There's not too much about them that we haven't already talked about. They're very light, very clean. They're kind of like a flavored water with alcohol and a little carbonation. And so I think that's part of the reason. Plus, again, they're gluten-free, low carb, and low calorie. So you put all those together, and that's why the seltzers have taken off in the beer scene, taken over a lot of the craft beer and big beer shelves. But it's taken people like us to add some fun flavors and keep it exciting, keep it part of our craft, to reintroduce these fun flavors for everybody. So
Now, do you guys have the same opinion about drinking seltzer out of a glass versus a can? Because in my experience, it's probably better out of the can. If I have to, yeah.
I think it's personal preference, honestly. I'm a draft guy. If I had my choice, I'd go draft first, but that's totally personal.
Maybe I need to do more experimenting. I'm gonna have to come get some more from you guys and see how I feel.
Yeah.
Gary asked, we do make a few, like a couple a blonde ale and a Kolsch, which are our lightest beers, and the Kolsch is new. It's actually St. Paul is our Kolsch beer.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Paul. So yeah, come on by and give it a try.
I feel like it's calling my name.
Yeah. But back to the whole thing. Yeah, if you haven't drank out of a glass, again, almost every craft beer gets poured into a glass. You get more aromas just pouring it itself. And then there's some darker beers that actually taste better as they warm up. So your stouts and your porters, you actually can pour it out, let it sit out for 15, 20 minutes. And then a stout will bring on some new flavors as they get a little warmer. And
I think that IPA too, that St. John that you guys tried, actually, if you let it sit a little while, it does taste a little different 20 minutes later. I actually think it tastes a little better, but again, personal preference.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about your expansion? Now, I have not, unfortunately, I've not visited your location, but in the last couple of months, but I hear you guys are growing. So can you tell our attendees a little bit about
West, and you'll find
yeah.
You're getting bigger, right?
We expanded in March. March 14th was our official open date. And that was, if you remember back, that was a Saturday. And it was kind of our St. Patrick's Day breakfast bash. We opened it, I think, 8 in the morning. Got a great, I guess, 14, 16-hour day out of it. And then the next day they said, we'll be closing all bars and restaurants. So we knew that we had a good thing going, and we were lucky to open in time, or at least try it out before the stoppage came. And we're lucky too, because a lot of people were here before we expanded. We were pretty small. I think it was roughly 400 to 500 square feet, 20 some seats that we had available. And by governor's orders, we had to reduce that by half after this pandemic. So we would have been down to 9 or 10 seats, but luckily we had already planned and had opened the expansion, and we had a lot of generous people wanted to see us that happen, and they donated to help us do that. And we're fortunate and really appreciate everyone that helped out, because it's really helped us kind of keep going. To be honest, I think we're now down, or officially we're at 49 seats divided by 2. So
Yeah, so with our expansion, if you haven't, a lot of people came to the last one of the events we had. It's very small. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 8 or 9 tables set up inside that are all about 6 to 10 feet away. Plus, we're also doing outside seating. We have about a 30 by 50 area outside. And Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're going to put a burn barrel outside, burning some wood, which will help keep you a little warmer. And then Friday through Sunday, as long as it's not too windy, we're going to set up tents with a heater outside.
Yeah, if that wind can stay down, we will have warm outside seating, which I know people are, like to sit out. I know there's people that like to sit outside that don't want to be inside yet, and we understand that. So we're trying to extend our outdoor patio as long as we can. I see some new questions come in here.
So Blue Crew, yes, the seltzers are about 4 days faster than a normal beer to turn around. So yeah, they do take a little less than a normal craft beer. Deb, the Kolsch, this version of this Kolsch, so yes, we do St. Hedwig.
Which was excellent this year.
So we do St. Hedwig and St. Anthony for the Polish American Festival. This uses some German hops. It's St. Paul, so the Kolsch style isn't new, but St. Paul is the new beer. And yes, there is access to the university trails, bike trail from the back of our parking lot to the actual trail itself.
Yeah, so you don't even have to get onto Bancroft actually here. You can stay on the trail. There's a trail off the trail to our back parking lot. It's pretty safe. We again are kid friendly and dog friendly, so we've seen a lot of traffic that way.
All right. Well, it's 8 o'clock. So if you have additional questions, feel free to keep them coming. But at this time, I would like to officially thank Aaron and Eric for spending time with us. First off, thank you for all the wonderful beer you've made. Thank you for allowing us to have this event featuring your beer. Reminder to those of you that tuned in tonight, we're actually going to try to keep doing these sort of virtual beer tastings over the next few months. Next month, we actually have Ernest Brew Works, which is going to be taking place on November 17th. So keep that in mind, keep that on your calendar. But once again, we want to thank Aaron and Eric for taking time and answering our questions and sort of, rolling back the curtain and letting us hear about their experience, their beers, and sort of why they are the way that they are. If you have any other questions, feel free to submit them. But once again, we thank all of you who tuned in tonight and, of course, stopped by and picked up some wonderful beer.
Thanks, Sam and Paul.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.